Welcome to Conversations on the Coast, the Bay Area's premier author interview program. And today is like a fun day for me because the author with us today is someone I've interviewed before, and she was nice enough to say before we started that it was a good interview. We don't know. We'll have to go into the archive to find out. But she's not here to talk about an old book. She's here to talk about Stranded, a Maggie ODell novel by Alex Kava, published by Doubleday. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me back.
Well, I have good memories of the other one. You know, you are what they call in the copy a distinguished New York Times best-selling author. Now, the reason they say that, they, you know, on the flap, they establish a case for such a remark. Critically acclaimed Maggie ODell series, that's what you're known for. And this is number 11.
Correct.
11.
11 of 13.
That's a hell of a lot.
It seems to be. I can hardly remember all of them.
Her 13 books, including 2 standalone novels, that means they're not Maggie ODell books, have been published in more than 20 countries. I find this very impressive that thriller fiction apparently exports well.
It is kind of frightening, isn't it, that murder is so popular universally. Yeah. I actually sell almost as many books in Germany and Poland as I do here.
Well, that's wonderful.
It's very wonderful.
That's a wonderful thing. And she is also the recipient of something I need to find out about, the Mari Sandoz Award. What?
Mari Sandoz is a popular Nebraska author, literary author.
Ah.
I can't remember what period of time she's from, but she and Willa Cather are 2 claims to fame. Mm-hmm. And the Nebraska Library Association gives out the Mari Sandoz Award once a year to a distinguished person, not necessarily always an author, who has made some difference in the book and literary world.
Good for
them.
So,
yeah, that was very, very flattered.
When did you get that? Recently?
I got it in 2007, and it was shortly after they had one of my books in 2006 as One Book, One Nebraska. Mm-hmm. And for that honor, because usually that honor is bestowed on, you know, a dead author, and because I was because I was able to tour.
You were sick at the time.
I volunteered to do 32 city events.
Oh, that's how that tour happened. Uh-huh.
And that we did an RV across Nebraska, and they gave me the award the next year because they were evidently very impressed that I did that. Speaking
of Nebraska, I've lived in the Midwest in my time, and the final thing on the sketch, your biographical sketch on the back flap of the jacket, tells us that you live in Nebraska and Pensacola, Florida.
Correct.
And when I was in the Midwest, we would say, now that's the perfect life. Because obviously when the snow flies, you fly. Is that what you do?
That was what I originally intended to do. Unfortunately, I've been spending a lot of winters in Omaha recently because my mother has had some surgeries and I've been there taking care of her. But originally, that's what I was going to do, is spend the winters down in Pensacola and the summers in Omaha.
And let's get to the literary stuff. Somewhere, sometime, someone said of your Maggie ODell that she could be Reacher's long-lost twin. Explain.
I love Lee Child. He's become a friend. And Jack
Reacher is his...
Jack Reacher. Love Jack Reacher. Even can't see Tom Cruise as Jack Reacher, but I love Jack Reacher.
And that was a lousy choice, wasn't it?
But, you know, Tom Cruise has been after Lee for a long time to play that. Very enthusiastic about it, too. So you can't take that away from him. But Lee has blurbed and done quotes on other authors' books, a lot of them, a ton of them, but he's never ever said that about any female protagonist. And in conversation, I know that he reads my books, and in conversation I said, would you ever consider saying something like that? And he said, well, let me think about it. Actually, he didn't really have to think about it too much, and he came back with that. And I was just so tickled because that is like so flattering to me for me to have him say that.
You know, one of the reasons you're in town, in addition to promoting this new book, is to attend and be part of the faculty, I guess we call it, of something called the Book Passage Mystery Writers Conference.
Correct.
What is that?
Well, this was my first year involved, and I'm not part of the faculty for the weekend, but I was one of the presenters last night at their opening night dinner. John Lasqua, who writes legal thrillers, and I had a conversation last night, and the conference is really quite lovely. I mean, the Book Passages store is just really, really very lovely.
One of the best in the country.
That was my first trip there, and I was very impressed. I mean, I would have loved to have just spend, a couple of hours in their store.
Walking around.
Absolutely. And it
has two separate sections.
Yes.
One given over to your kind of book.
It was very impressive, and they had dinner on the patio, which was quite lovely. And then John and I sat down and we talked about writing and just the business and the craft, and then opened it up for questions. And a lot of the people who were there are very, very serious about their writing and very serious about becoming authors. And the one thing that I kept trying to instill in them is that whether you're published or not, you're still a writer at heart. You are a writer.
Good point.
The only difference in being published is whether you become an author. But don't let that ever take anything away from you're still a writer.
The other difference is you get a chance to be on Conversations on the Coast.
Absolutely.
Which I don't know. That's nothing to aspire to, really.
I don't know. It's an awful lot of fun, and I get free Danish.
There are certain elements of plot in this one that are different. I think the most notable is that Maggie is actually being stalked by the guy who does the killing. I want to talk about that when we return.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Follow us on Twitter at Jim Foster COC, or send an email to jimfostercoc@gmail.com.
We have good news to report today. Stranded, a new Maggie ODell novel by Alex Kava, is now available. Alex is here to talk about it, and we are most fortunate. Thanks again for stopping by. Booklist said some things about the book, including in her 11th Maggie ODell entry. Kava shows mastery in constructing a plot with nonstop action, covering a time span of just over a week, one day over a week, with suspense rising to a nearly unbearable level and a climax in the Florida backwaters. Well, you live near there, Pensacola. I mean, backwaters, it's terrible. I never knew you lived in the backwaters of Florida. Maggie is indomitable, as usual, slogging through mud or water in search of clues and perps, inured to the sight of decapitated or eviscerated bodies, cool in facing a canny killer, with a loyal supporting cast and hints of a new romantic interest. Prime escapism for thriller fans with strong stomachs. I don't know, are you happy with that?
Well, I was happy with it up until the strong stomach part.
Yeah.
Because I think thriller readers are pretty used to reading the sort of fare that I deliver every time without having to worry about what they've eaten before they sit down to read. But I've talked about this before that, I think that reviewers oftentimes judge female thriller writers much differently than they do male thriller writers. I can't imagine that any of Lee Child's Jack Reacher reviews include anything about needing a strong stomach to read.
I doubt it. And the other thing, the reason for that may be that the critic feels that a woman writer is invading, going someplace where it isn't appropriate for her to go.
Doesn't it seem odd, though, in the year 2013?
Nothing seems odd to me. No. I think it's quite possible. I think that we tend to put people in artistic boxes, and all the liberal talk that we might utter, I don't think changes that.
Well, and it's a female protagonist, too. And so I think that's kind of a double-edged sword for them as well. Because the thing about new romance for Maggie too, the portion of the book that includes any part of romance is probably a couple of pages.
Less than one chapter. I counted it. About 2.5 pages.
Yes.
And I loved every bit of it. Good. It's well done. Now, the other plotting point that I want to have you talk about a little bit more is this whole idea that there's this madman killer running around the country, getting at people at their most vulnerable time when they've pulled over to rest or to eat near an interstate or on an interstate, and going after them. And somehow the killer decides that he would like to, in a sense, target Maggie in a very unusual way. What does he do?
He does target her because he sees that he's an expert in what he does, and she's an expert in what she does. And somehow he kind of relates the two matters together. So he's almost kind of wanting to show off to her and show her how much of an expert. Yeah,
more than once he says, I like doing this stuff to Maggie because it's an appropriate challenge.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
He's having a good time.
Yes, and oftentimes that's how he chooses his victims too. He's started to do doubles, which means taking on 2 people at a time because he wants the extra challenge. But a lot of this idea was inspired by there actually are over 500 unsolved cases along our nation's highways that have not been solved. And they do think that some of them may be due to several serial killers using the interstates and using the rest areas and using truck stops in a way to get victims. And it's an easy, fast escape route.
And as you prove in this book, trying to get the killer and convict or arrest him or her is not easy because of the geography of the country and the mobility of its people.
Absolutely, because you don't know where he resides. You don't know where he's going to strike next. It's really quite the perfect playground for a serial killer.
Whoa. In my opinion, there's a certain kind of skill or art to writing the thriller book. And could you show us some of that art by reading from your own book, please?
Sure. And now he realized the high-pitched scream was coming from his own throat. He could feel it more than hear it. It came from somewhere deep and vibrated along his ribs before escaping up and out of his mouth. And he had to shut up. He'd hear him. He'd know exactly where he was. Run. Faster. Mud sucked at his bare feet. Shirt, jeans, shoes, and socks. All cheap exchange for freedom. He knew his bruised and battered soles were cut open and bleeding, scraped raw by the sharp rocks. He blinked hot tears. Don't think about the pain. This is nothing compared to what happened to Ethan. He needed to concentrate on running, not the pain, not his skin that was slashed and bruised. How far did these woods go? There had to be a clearing. He had to run away from the interstate, away from the rest area. But there had to be something more than trees, maybe a farmhouse, another road. He didn't hear the footfalls behind him anymore. No branches cracking or leaves crunching. His chest heaved and his heart jackhammered. He slowed just a fraction and held his breath. Nothing. Just a breeze. Even the birds had quieted. Had the madman returned back? Had he given up? Decided to honor his promise? Maybe one was enough for him tonight. No a chance to look back over his shoulder. That's when his foot caught on a fallen log and sent him sprawling. His elbows slammed into the rock and mud. The impact rattled his teeth. White stars flashed as his skin ripped on the palms of his hands. He tried to stand, fell back to his knees. The foot that had caused the fall burned with pain. He looked back at it and grimaced. His ankle was twisted and his left foot was at an unnatural angle. But it wasn't the pain that sent panic through his body. It was the fact that he couldn't move it. He stopped himself, held his breath again as best he could, waited, listened.
If you don't want to go out and buy this book after hearing that, you haven't been listening. But we didn't have time to talk about the man that I wanted to talk about. Therefore, we will come back in the third segment and talk about Ryder Creed. Stay tuned.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Follow us on Twitter at Jim Foster COC or send an email to jimfostercoc@gmail.com.
Alex Kava is here talking to us today about her latest Maggie ODell novel called Stranded, published by Doubleday, about which the Bible of the Business Publishers Weekly says, in bestseller Kava's 11th hair-raising thriller. Oh, how the cliches come pouring out. Featuring FBI agent Maggie ODell, adds a human touch to the heart-thumping chase. What in the world are they talking about in this human touch? Do you have any idea?
Well,
is it the possible romance between?
Hopefully it's because the characters do actually care about each other, and I do have a lot of character development in my books, even though they are thrillers, and that's always something that you sort of have to balance out, because I know in a thriller you have to keep the pace going, so you can't be bogged down by giving a lot of character development. But somehow I try to do that, and I hope that I manage to do that.
You do that very well, I think, by the means of abrupt switches. I'm thinking particularly of the character, the psychologist Gwen, and there are a couple of places in the book where a chapter, a part of the book begins with Gwen, blah 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 blah, out of the blue, and then the next couple of sentences you get to understand why that was put down in the first place. So it works well, at least for me. I choose my points of view in a manner a lot of times that don't necessarily drive the action forward. Gwen is used primarily for a purpose of you understanding Maggie better, of you understanding Tully better. That I can't accomplish maybe in their chapters, because their chapters have to be boom, 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 boom. Well,
yes.
Yeah.
And Gwen is Maggie's only person that she really trusts in the world, that she has known for forever, and so Gwen can do that quite well.
Yeah, it works. It works
Thank
beautifully.
you.
Now, by gosh, I'm going to get to this guy that kills me, and the guy is an interesting fellow. Beginning with his name. His name is Ryder, R-Y-D-E-R, Creed, and who is he? What does he do? I mean, what's his background?
I love Ryder Creed. He's quite an interesting character. He has a business called Canine Crime Sense that he developed because years ago his little sister disappeared at 11 years old, and Ryder was 14, and her body was never ever found. And part of his business is training cadaver dogs. And he did it solely with the mission of someday hopefully finding his little sister's body, or hopefully rescuing her if she's still alive somewhere.
And that fact haunts him.
Very much so. Very much so. And every search that he goes on, that he knows that it's a woman that they're looking for, because she disappeared at 11. But it was 15 years ago. So they could find her as an 11-year-old corpse. They could find her as a teenage corpse. They could find her as a young woman. So every cadaver search that he goes on is just sort of heart-wrenching and sort of very exhausting for him, but he still does it. And it gave me the opportunity to put some dogs in my books. I love dogs. I have a pack of dogs, and I
put some dogs in the book. I mean, you got a great dog here, Grace.
Grace is wonderful, isn't she? Yeah. I dare you not to fall in love with Grace.
Oh my gosh! And then you've got a second dog because Grace is incapacitated.
Yes.
And so a dog by the name of Bolo has to take over. And by God, the dogs are the heroes of this story.
They are.
Seems to me.
They are in very many ways. They are.
I don't know.
And that is one thing with Creed too. I mean, his job is to train dogs, and he's on this mission. And he rescues a lot of these dogs, and he trains abandoned dogs to become cadaver and search dogs, which is very unusual. But in a sense, his dogs kind of rescue him too.
Now, this is the first time he's been a character in your book.
Yes.
And I dare say, and I don't predict much, that it isn't the last time.
I hope we'll see more of Ryder Creed.
And the dogs.
Absolutely.
Absolutely got to see more of the dogs. Now, there's another character in the book who gets into the book, I think, in a strange, realistic way. And his name is Raymond Kunze, Kunze. Tell us about Raymond and how he got into your book.
Well, Maggie lost her boss several books ago, in Exposed, in fact. Both she and her boss were exposed to a virus, and he didn't make it. She did. And Raymond Kunze has been in since Black Friday, so he's been in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 books. And he's always been very antagonistic with his relationship with Maggie from the very beginning, because it's almost like she's had to prove herself all over again to him. And he's sent her into the path of hurricanes. He's sent her into the western Nebraska to do all kinds. I mean, he just kind of sends her on these kind of chasing her own shadow sometime.
All of that's wonderful, but is there not a Ray Kunze in your real life?
Absolutely. Ray Kunze is based.
I find remarkable.
Ray Kunze, the real Ray Kunze, and I met at Book Expo America. Yes, and I came to know him. He lives in Dallas, Texas. He used to be a regular there, and at Book Expo. And one year he said, I'd really love to be a corpse in your book sometime.
And you did more than that.
I absolutely did. He's a kind of a standard character now.
I always knew you were a wonderful writer. I always knew your books are great. And the latest one is called Stranded. The author who's been with us, Alex Kava. This has been Conversations on the Coast, and I'm Jim Foster.
Follow us on Twitter at Jim Foster COC, or send an email to jimfostercoc@gmail.com.